Take a deep breath. The air you're breathing is thick, wood, and heavy with the smell of damp earth and blooming flowers you can't name. You're not in your room anymore. You're standing in the undergrowth of a Mesoamerican jungle, somewhere in the lowlands, where the world is a symphony of greens and browns. Dappled sunlight filters through the high canopy, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor. The air hums with the buzz of insects and the distant calls of strange birds. It feels alive. You're here for one reason. You're looking for a specific tree. Not just any tree, but the one the locals call cacao. It's not a towering giant, not a majestic cap-oak tree that scrapes the sky. It's actually quite modest. A slender tree that rarely grows more than 20 or 30 feet tall. You walk carefully, your feet sinking slightly into the soft, loamy soil, and then you see it. At first, it looks almost wrong, unlike the apple or pear trees you might picture. The fruit of the cacao tree doesn't hang from delicate branches at the top. Instead, these large, ridged pods, shaped like an elongated melon or a wrinkled football, sprout directly from the main trunk and the thickest branches. They cluster there in shades of deep green, sunny yellow, vibrant orange, and a rich, blushing red. This strange growth pattern, by the way, has a modern scientific name, cauliflower. But to the people here, it's just another sign of the tree's divine nature. It's as if the tree is offering up its gifts directly from its very hardwood. Yori told a story, a whisper passed down through generations. The story about a god, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. He was a god of wisdom, light, and kindness, and it was he who, in an act of profound love for humanity, descended from the heavens carrying a single cacao tree stolen from the paradise of the gods. He taught the Toltec people, the ancestors of the Aztecs, how to cultivate this sacred tree, how to harvest its pods, and how to prepare the drink that would connect them to the divine. This is the mainstream, accepted origin myth, that cacao is not of this world, but a direct gift from a benevolent god. You reach out and touch one of the pods. The skin is waxy and firm beneath your fingertips. The ridge is pronounced. It feels ancient and powerful, but the gift came with a warning. The other gods were furious with Quetzalcoatl for sharing their most prized possession with mortals. In their rage, they drove him away, promising he would one day return from the east. This part of the story will become complicated later on. For now, you just stand in the quiet shade of this tree, the cacao, a name given to it centuries later by a European botanist, but one that perfectly captures the Aztec belief, food of the gods. But how did humans first figure this out? How did they know that inside this strange, hard-shelled pod was something so valuable? The truth is, nobody knows for sure. Historians and archaeologists are still debating the exact sequence of events. There's no single aha moment recorded in stone. It's theorized that perhaps monkeys were the first to figure it out, cracking the pods open to eat the sweet, fleshy pulp surrounding the beans, and that some curious human decided to copy them. Others believe it was discovered by accident, the pod falling into a fire, roasting the beans inside and releasing an irresistible aroma. The stories change with each culture, from the Olmecs to the Maya to the Aztecs, and the real origin is likely a slow burn discovery, a mystery woven over thousands of years of trial. Undoubtedly, the lot of air. You look up at the pods, nestled against the trunk. They are the beginning of everything. They are food. They are medicine. They will become currency, and they are a direct line to the gods. But right now, they are just a silent, colorful promise hanging in the humid air. The secret is locked inside, and the first step to unlocking it is the harvest. The quiet reverence of the moment is broken by a soft trestle behind you. An old man, his face a beautiful map of wrinkles etched by sun and time, approaches. He carries a long, slender pole, almost like a fishing rod, but at its end is a sharp, curved blade. He nods at you, a silent greeting, and then his eyes turn to the tree with a look of deep respect, like one might greet an old and powerful friend. He is a master of the harvest, and this is a task that requires more art than muscle. He points the pole towards a deep red pod, nestled high up on the trunk. You see now why the tool is necessary. Many of the best pods are out of arm's reach, and you can't just climb this tree. Its bark is delicate. With a smooth, practiced movement, he hooks the blade around the pod short, thick stem. There's no hacking, no violent shaking, just a precise, firm pull. A sharp snap echoes in the quiet grove, and the heavy pod tumbles down, landing with a soft thud on a bed of leaves deep prepared. He explains, in a low voice, that the harvest is a delicate conversation with the tree. You must only take what is ready. A pod, he shows you, will often have a slightly looser feel at the stem, and its color will be at its absolute peak. No lingering green on a yellow pod, no dullness to the red. But the most important part, the absolute rule, is where you make the cut. You must never damage the small, cushioned node on the trunk where the pod grew. This little nub of bark is where future flowers, and thus future pods, will emerge. A careless harvester who rips the pod away damages the tree's ability to give fruit next season. It's a tiny detail that separates a good harvest from a greedy one, ensuring the tree remains generous for years to come. This is a classic piece of agricultural wisdom, passed down through generations. He gestures for you to try. Another man hands you a heavy, broad-bladed knife, more like a short machete. The first pod is opened not with finesse, but with a swift, decisive crack. He splits it lengthwise. You lean in, expecting to see, well, you're not sure. Maybe something brown, something that looks like chocolate. But that's not what you see at all. The inside of the pod is startlingly white. Nestled within the thick rind is a bed of milky, slimy pulp, almost like a cluster of giant lychee fruits, and buried within that sweet, sticky goo are about 30 to 50 large, pale, almond-shaped beans. They look nothing like the dark, bitter things they will become. You can smell a sweet, slightly floral, and fruity aroma from the pulp. A child who wanders over is given a finger full of the white pulp to suck on, and he grins. This part, the sweet flesh, is a simple jungle treat, enjoyed by all. The beans themselves, however, are another story. This is where things get a bit hazy for historians. We know the harvest was steeped in ritual. The act of taking from a god's tree was not done lightly. Offerings were almost certainly made. Prayers were whispered. But the exact words, the specific offerings, that's something scholars are still piecing together. Were there specific chants for the red pods versus the yellow ones? Did they offer a prayer to Quetzalcoatl with every cut? These fine details of the sacred choreography were likely passed down orally, varying from village to village, and many were lost to time. It's a frustrating gap in our knowledge, a whispered conversation between the harvester and the divine that we can no longer quite overhear. Now the real work begins. The harvested pods are gathered into baskets. Your hands are soon covered in the sticky, sweet pulp as you help scoop the beans from their fractured shells. The hard outer rind is discarded, left to rot back into the rich jungle floor. All you're keeping is this messy pile of pulp-covered seeds. They are pale and smell sweet. It seems impossible that this gooey mass will ever become a currency, a medicine, or the bitter drink of kings. It feels like the opposite of all those things. But the old man nods, a knowing look in his eyes. The body of the cacao bean has been harvested. Nell, he explains, it is time to awaken its soul. And that awakening begins with a process that, to an outsider, looks a lot like letting it rot. You follow the harvesters as they carry the heavy baskets, laden with the slimy, pulp-covered beans, to a clearing a short distance away. The air here is different. It's still warm, but there's a new, an almost vinegary smell mixed with the scent of the jungle. It's the smell of transformation. In the clearing, several large, shallow wooden boxes are laid out, covered with thick banana leaves. This, you are told, is where the beans will sweat. One of the men lifts a heavy lid from a box, and a wave of heat in the tangi, Fermented aroma washes over you. Inside, a mass of cacao beans, already a day into their process, sits in a gooey, bubbling pile. The pristine white pulp you saw earlier is now melting away, liquefying into a sticky, pale yellow liquid that drains through small holes in the bottom of the box. This is fermentation, a process familiar to anyone who has ever made wine or beer. But here it feels more primal, more alchemical. You help dunk the fresh beans from your basket into an empty box. The process seems counterintuitively simple. The beans are piled in, covered with more large banana leaves, and then left to the magic of the heat and the ambient yeasts in the air. For the next 5 to 7 days, this pile of beans will be the center of quiet, constant activity. Twice a day, a worker comes to turn the pile, plunging his arms into the warm, sticky mass to ensure that the beans are evenly exposed to air and that the heat is distributed. This is crucial. If the pile gets too hot, the beans cook. If it's not turned, the beans in the center won't ferment properly. This is the mainstream science behind it. Of course, the yeasts in the air consume the sugary pulp, creating alcohol. Then, bacteria move in to consume that alcohol, creating acetic acid. This acid, along with the rising temperature, which can reach over 120 degrees Fahrenheit or 50 degrees Celsius, purely from the natural chemical reaction, is what changes everything. The acid seeps into the beans, killing the germ inside and triggering a cascade of complex chemical changes. It's here, in this hot, sweaty, and frankly smelly box, that the precursors to the chocolate flavor we know are born. Without this step, the beans would just be intensely bitter, astringent seeds. The fermentation is where the magic truly begins. But here's a strange little detail you wouldn't expect. This process creates a byproduct, a significant amount of sweet, slightly alcoholic liquid that drains from the fermentation boxes. What happened to it? While the historical record is thin, it's almost certain that the ancient Mesoamericans didn't let this go to waste. Modern experiments have shown that this cacao sweat can be used to create a potent alcoholic beverage, a sort of cacao wine or pulp brandy. It's a fascinating thought that long before they were drinking chocolate, they might have been drinking a potent alcohol made from its fruit. While we have ample evidence for corn and date-based alcohols, the existence and role of a widespread cacao pulp liquor is one of those things historians and food scientists love to debate. Was it a common drink, or just a local corn? The evidence is tantalizingly scarce. As you watch the process over the next 2 days, you see the beans themselves begin to change. Their pale, purplish color starts to deepen, turning into a richer, more familiar shade of brown. The smell also evolves. The initial sweet, fruity scent gives way to the sharp tang of fermentation, which then slowly mellows, allowing a nutty, almost roasted aroma to start peeking through. You are smelling the birth of chocolate. The old man explains that this process is like a test for the bean's spirit. It must endure the heat and the soreness to prove its worth. A bean that doesn't ferment correctly, one that gets moldy or remains hardened purple inside, is considered to have a weak spirit and is discarded. There is no science of microbes here, no talk of yeast or acetic acid. There is only the language of nature, spirit, and transformation. The beans are not rotting. They are being purified. They are sweating out their impurities to become something worthy of the gods and of the emperor. By the end of the week, the sticky pulp is all but gone, and the beans have changed color completely. They are no longer slimy, just damp. Their soul has been awakened. Now, it's time to give them a new kind of strength, the strength of the sun. The newly fermented beans are scooped out of the sweating boxes. They are still damp and swollen, but their color is now a rich, cinnamon brown, and the air around them carries a complex aroma, part vinegar, part fruit, with a deep, earthy note underneath. They are still not a currency, not yet. They are fragile, perishable. To become the valuable commodity that powers an empire, they need to undergo one final, crucial stage of their initial processing: drying. You help carry the shallow baskets of damp beans to another clearing, this one more exposed to the sky. Here, large reed mats are spread out on the sun-baked earth. The beans are carefully poured onto the mats in a single, even layer, not too thick, or the ones on the bottom will mold, not too thin, or they'll scorch in the fierce tropical sun, like every stage before this. It's a delicate balance. Your job for the next week, maybe two, is surprisingly mundane but critically important. You are a bean raker, armed with a simple wooden rake. You spend your days slowly, almost meditatively, turning the beans. You have to keep them in constant, gentle motion, ensuring every single bean gets its fair share of sunlight and air. The sun beats down on your back, and the work is repetitive, but you quickly learn the rhythm of it. You can feel the change in the beans as you rake them. Day by day, they become lighter. The damp, soft texture gives way to a dry, hard exterior. The sharp, vinegary smell of fermentation slowly evaporates, replaced by that rich, nutty, and unmistakably chocolatey aroma. This is a well-understood part of the process. Drying locks in the flavors developed during fermentation and prevents mold from growing, making the beans stable for transport and storage. A properly dried bean would be the cornerstone of the Aztec economy. But there's a quirky, less discussed aspect to this stage. The human element. The people raking the beans aren't just mindless laborers. They are the final quality control inspectors. As you rake, your eyes, hands, and nose are constantly evaluating the product. You learn to spot the bad beans. The ones that are broken, the ones with insect holes, the flat, empty ones that somehow made it through, and the dreaded purple beans, the ones that failed to ferment and will forever taste like bitter chalk. These are plucked out and discarded. A single bag of poorly dried or low-quality beans could ruin a merchant's reputation. This is also where a bit of trickery could come into play, a practice that historians have found evidence of. Some less scrupulous producers might try to speed up the process. Instead of patiently sun-drying the beans, they might dry them over a low fire. This is faster, yes, but it imparts a smoky, acrid taste to the beans, masking the delicate flavors developed during fermentation. To an untrained buyer, the beans might look fine. They're dry, they're brown. But to a connoisseur, a priest, or the emperor's quartermaster, the smoky taint would be an immediate sign of a low-grade, rushed product. The difference between sun-kissed and fire-scorched was the difference between premium and garbage. As you work, you hear the satisfying sound the beans now make. A dry, rattling click as you rake them across the mat. They have shrunk and hardened. If you pick one up and shake it next to your ear, you can hear the dried cotyledons, the nibs, rattling loosely inside the thin, papery shell. That's the sign that they are ready. They have been transformed. They are no longer just seeds from a jungle tree. They are now a stable, durable, and incredibly valuable commodity. You watch as the finished beans are swept into coarse cloth sacks. They are a deep, rich brown, hard as little stones, and smell divine. You are holding the money of the Aztec Empire in your hands. A single bean can buy you a large tomato. A handful can buy you a rabbit. A sack like the one you're refilling could, in the right market, buy you a canoe or even a slave. The journey from the god's tree, through the sweaty fermentation and the patient drying, is complete. The cacao is now ready to travel. Its next stop is the heart of the empire, the magnificent island city of Tenochtitlan, where its true value will be put to the test. The sacks of dried cacao beans are heavy, and the journey ahead it is long. You are now part of a caravan of sorts, but one without wheels or beasts of burden. In the rugged, mountainous terrain of Mesoamerica, the greatest engine of commerce is human muscle. You've fallen with a group of men known as TLAMEH, the professional porters of the Aztec world. These men are human highways, carrying staggering loads over vast distances. Eamon helps you adjust your own cargo. It's not just a sack slung over your shoulder. The TLAMEH have a specific piece of technology, the Coca XDLI, A simple but effective wooden frame that allows multiple sacks or bundles to be strapped together. The real genius, however, is the cacao, a TUM twine, which is a thick strap that rests not on the shoulders, but across the forehead, the weight of the entire frame, which could be 50 pounds or more, is supported by the strength of the neck and distributed down the spine. It looks incredibly uncomfortable, and for the first few hours, it is. Your neck aches, and you feel a constant, dull pressure on your forehead. You stumble along, trying to keep pace. The path is often no more than an arrow, well-trodden track, winding its way up steep mountain passes and down into sweltering valleys. You cross rivers on swaying rope bridges, your precious cargo strapped securely to your back. The professional TLMMEH move with a steady, rhythmic gait, their bodies conditioned for this relentless work. They chew on coca leaves, a mild stimulant, to ward off fatigue and hunger, a practice well documented among long-distance carriers. As you travel, you realize you are part of a massive, intricate network. This is the circulatory system of the empire. You see other porters carrying different goods, vibrant macaw feathers from the southern jungles, bales of cotton from the coastal plains, ducks of salt, and precious obsidian for making tools and weapons. And moving in the opposite direction, from the capital, come finished goods, finely decorated pottery, obsidian blades, and luxurious textiles. The empire is held together not by roads wide enough for carts, but by these narrow footpaths and the sheer endurance of the men who walk them. One of the older porters, seeing your struggle, shares a piece of strange but practical advice. He tells you to watch out for the Pocteke. These are not your average porters or merchants. The Pocteke were a powerful, hereditary guild of long-distance merchants, a class apart. They organized these massive trade expeditions, acted as spies for the emperor, and held immense wealth and influence. They were the ones who truly understood the value of what you are carrying. They knew which regions produced the best beans, which lords demanded the highest tribute, and how to navigate the complex political landscape between the capital and the outlying provinces. However, there's a historical debate about the true nature of the Pocteke. Were they simply merchants, a powerful middle class operating for profit, or were they primarily agents of the state? Their trading activities a cover for intelligence gathering and paving the way for military expansion. The lines are blurry. They enjoyed special privileges, had their own courts, and answered only to the emperor. Their caravans were often heavily armed, not just against bandits, but as a show of Aztec power in semi-independent territories. So as you walk, you realize this isn't just a business trip. It's an act of statecraft. One evening, you stop at a designated resting station. It's little more than a simple shelter, but it provides a place to sleep and a fire to cook your meager meal of maize cakes. You listen to the stories of the other travelers. They speak of treacherous mountain passes, of jaguar sightings, and of the different customs in the villages they pass through. They also complain about tribute. Much of the cacao you are carrying isn't being traded. It's tribute, a tax paid by a conquered province to the Aztec emperor. This is a key part of the empire's wealth. The beans are a form of state-controlled income, flowing from the periphery to the center. After many days of walking, the landscape begins to change. The air becomes drier. The mountains give way to a wide, high-altitude basin, and then you see it. In the distance, shimmering in the center of a vast lake, is a sight that defies belief. A city of white temples and sprawling buildings, connected to the mainland by long, straight causeways. It's Tenochtitlan, the heart of the empire. The city built on a lake. You've carried the food of the gods all this way, and now you are about to enter the place where it is most coveted. A market unlike any other in this world. You walk the final stretch on one of the great causeways, a wide, raised road built of stone and earth that cuts straight across the waters of Lake Texcoco. The engineering is staggering. The water on one side is fresh, held back by a system of dikes, while the other side is brackish. People in canoes glide silently past you, laden with goods, forming a liquid highway that feeds the city. The sheer scale of Tenochtitlan is overwhelming. It's a metropolis teeming with hundreds of thousands of people, larger than any city in Europe at the time. The air buzzes with a new kind of energy. Below, constant hum of human activity. Your destination is not the ceremonial heart of the city, with its great pyramidal temples, but an adjacent island, connected by another bridge. This is Telteleco. In its center is the great marketplace, the beating economic heart of the entire empire. Even before you see it, you can hear it. A dull roar of voices, thousands upon thousands of people talking, shouting, pottering, laughing. You step through an archway and the scene explodes in front of you. It's a vast, open plaza, meticulously clean and organized, swarming with a crowd so dense it seems to move like a single organism. The Spanish conquistador Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who saw this market with his own eyes, would later write that he and his comrades were astounded at the number of people and the quantity of merchandise, and at the good order and control that was maintained. This was some chaotic bazaar. It was a highly regulated, sprawling department store under the open sky. The market is laid out in designated streets. There's a street for pottery, where you see stacks of burnished red and black pots in every conceivable shape and size. There's a section for jewelers, where merchants sit behind cloths displaying intricate gold and silver work, jade beads, and brilliant turquoise mosaics. You walk past the herb sellers, where the air is thick with the scent of medicinal plants, dried herbs, and bundles of fragrant vanilla beans. You see vendors selling live animals, turkeys gobbling in wooden pens, hairless dogs bred for meat, and even eagles. There are stalls selling finely woven cotton cloaks, tools made of obsidian and copper, and jaguar pelts. It's a sensory overload. The colors, the sounds, the smells, it's all consuming. But your group heads for a specific, high-status section of the market. This is where the most valuable goods are traded. This is the domain of the cacao bean. Here, merchants sit calmly behind neat piles of the precious brown beans. They are not just heaped in piles. They are often counted out into small, specific quantities. You watch a transaction. A woman wants to buy a decorated cotton cloak. The merchant names his price, 30 cacao beans. She carefully counts out the beans from a small cloth bag. He inspects them, checking their quality, before handing over the cloak. This is the bedrock of the economy in action. Everyone here, from the farmer selling tomatoes to the artisan selling gold lip plugs, understands this system. Historians call this commodity money, where an item with its own intrinsic value also serves as a medium of exchange. Cacao was perfect for this. It was desirable, portable, and could be divided into small units. But it was the perfect system. What constituted a bean was a large bean worth more than a small one. The Aztec state tried to regulate this by establishing standardized units of exchange. A xiquipilay was a bag containing 8 zaro beans, and 3 of these made up a cargo, or a load, which was roughly what a single porter could carry. These larger units were used for major transactions, like paying tribute or buying land, for everyday purchases. However, it was all about the individual bean. You watch as a man buys a canoe for 1 xiquipilay. The payment is obeyed, sealed and verified by market officials. The trust is in the sealed bag, not in counting out 8,000 individual beans. You've made it. The beans you carried on your back have been delivered to the merchant who will now trade them for goods from all over the empire. You feel a sense of accomplishment, having connected the remote jungle grove to this incredible nexus of commerce. But as you stand in the buzzing chaos, you notice a merchant holding a bean up to the light, a suspicious look on his face. You're about to learn that in a world where your money literally grows on trees, you have to be very careful about counterfeits. The merchant you were watching, a stern-faced man with sharp eyes, motions for you to come closer. He holds up the suspicious cacao bean between his thumb and forefinger. To your untrained eye, it looks like any other bean. Brown, rich, and hard. He then takes a good bean from his own pile and hands them both to you. He tells you to feel their weight. The difference is subtle, almost imperceptible, but it's there. The suspicious bean feels lighter. Hello, with a flick of his thumbnail. He cracks it open. It's mostly empty inside, just a dusty residue. It's a fake. He explains that counterfeiting cacao was a constant problem, a high-stakes game of deception in the marketplace. The methods were surprisingly ingenious. A common trick was to take older, withered beans that had lost their value and coat them in a reddish earth mixed with a little water. Once dried, the coating would mimic the color and texture of a prime, high-quality bean. An even more elaborate method involved taking the shells of good beans, carefully opening them, filling them with packed dirt or avocado rind, and then gluing the shell back together. This is a fascinating bit of historical trivia confirmed by Spanish chroniclers like Bernardino de Sahagun, who meticulously documented the various ways market-goers could be swindled. The officials of the Tlatelolco market did not take this lightly. Justice here was swift and public. The merchant points to a group of men in official-looking cloaks patrolling the aisles. These are the market judges. If a dispute arose or a cheater was caught, they would be dragged to a small courthouse located at the edge of the market to face immediate judgment. The punishments were severe, designed as a powerful deterrent. Getting caught passing off fake beans was just a fine. It could result in having your goods confiscated and, for repeat offenders, a public beating or even enslavement. The integrity of the currency had to be protected at all costs. Now that your delivery is made, you have a small pouch of beans of your own, your wages for the long journey. It's time to be a consumer. You decide to start with something simple. Food. You walk over to the prepared food section, a bustling area filled with vendors cooking over small clay braziers. The air is filled with the delicious smell of sizzling meat and toasting corn. You see women deftly slapping maize dough between their hands, forming it into thin cakes they cook on a hot clay griddle called a cone. These are chilax coli, the ubiquitous corn tortillas that are the staple of the diet. You approach a vendor. She has a stack of warm tortillas and several steaming pots filled with stews. You point to one. She ladles a rich, dark stew made with turkey and chili into a small clay bowl. You ask the price. 2 beans, she says, gesturing to the cacao. You carefully count out the perfect beans from your pouch. She inspects them for a moment, not with the deep suspicion of the cacao merchant, but with a practiced glance, and then accepts them, pushing the warm bowl towards you. You've just successfully bartered. There's no haggling for something this small. Prices for common goods were fairly standardized. But what about haggling for larger items? This is where the debate among historians lies. How much were prices fixed versus how much was open to negotiation? For basic foodstuffs on standard goods, prices seem to have been relatively stable and understood by everyone. 1 bean for a tamale, 10 for a rabbit, and so on. But for luxury goods, a finely feathered shield, a piece of jade jewelry, the art of the haggle was almost certainly part of the transaction. This involved not just arguing over the number of beans, but also potentially offering other goods in exchange. A system of barter and currency running in parallel. A merchant might accept 100 cacao beans and a fine cotton cloak for an obsidian mirror. The Tlatelolco market was a complex dance of multiple, overlapping systems of value. You finish your stew. The rich, spicy flavor a welcome reward. You wander through the market, your pouch of beans feeling like a heavy responsibility. Every purchase requires a small act of judgment, a verification of currency. You are no longer just a porter. You are an active participant in the economic lifeblood of the greatest city in this world. But you know that the ultimate purpose of these beans isn't just to be traded for tortillas and rabbits. Their highest calling is to be transformed, through fire and water, into the drink of the gods. And that process begins with a ritual of fire and smoke. Your journey with the cacao bean now takes you away from the vast, public chaos of the market and into a more private, specialized space. You enter the courtyard of a nobleman's home, a place where the beans you delivered will be prepared for consumption by the elite. The air in this part of the compound smells different, richer, too austere. You've arrived at the kitchen. or more accurately, the culinary workshop, where a group of women are preparing for the first stage of the transformation, the roasting. One woman sits before a large, flat earthenware griddle, the comel, identical to the one used for making tortillas. It rests over a low, glowing wood fire. This is where the roasting happens. It's a deceptively simple setup, but the skill involved is immense. She takes a handful of the dried, fermented cacao beans, the very same kind you carried and traded, and scatters them onto the hot surface. Immediately, a new sound fills the air. Continuous crackling, like tiny bits of popcorn. A wonderfully rich, nutty, and intensely chocolatey aroma begins to rise from the griddle, far more potent than the smell of the raw, dried beans. This is the moment the flavor deepens, the moment of truth for the bean. The woman uses a small, flat stone to gently move the beans around the surface, ensuring they roast evenly. Her movements are fluid and efficient, a testament to years of practice. She explains, without looking up from her desk, that this is the most delicate part of the process. If you under-roast the beans, they will retain a raw, green flavor and be difficult to grind. But the real crime is to over-roast them. Even a few seconds too long on the heat, and they will scorch, turning the rich, complex flavors into a single, dominant note of bitterness and burnt carbon. An entire batch of precious beans can be ruined in a moment of inattention. The perfect roast is a beautiful, uniform dark brown, and the aroma is strong but not sharp. This roasting process is a classic example of the Maillard reaction, the same chemical process that browns toast and sears steak. The heat causes amino acids and sugars within the bean to react, creating hundreds of new aromatic compounds that give chocolate its characteristic flavor and smell. The Aztecs didn't know the chemistry. Of course, for them, this was about listening to the beans. They knew by the sound, the smell, and the color exactly when the beans were ready. The science was purely sensory. Here's a fascinating little tidbit that often gets overlooked. The shell. After roasting, the outer shell of the bean becomes brittle and papery, separating easily from the precious nib inside. What did they do with these shells? Did they just throw them away? Almost certainly not. Aztec culture was notoriously waste-averse. While the historical record isn't perfectly clear on this, it's highly probable that the shells were steeped in hot water to create a light, tea-like infusion. This cacao tea would have a mild chocolate flavor, but lacked the intensity and fat of the main drink. It might have been a more common, everyday beverage, perhaps consumed by the women preparing the main drink or given to children, who were generally not permitted to drink the full-strength cacao TL. It's a theory, a piece of historical inference, but a very logical one. The woman expertly sweeps the roasted beans from the comel into a shallow basket to cool. Once they are no longer hot to the touch, the next step begins. We know it. She and another woman sit on the floor, and with quick, nimble fingers, they rub the roasted beans between their palms. The brittle shells crack and flake away, leaving the dark, fragmented pieces of the inner bean, the cacao nibs. They then pour the mixture of nibs and shell fragments from one basket to another in a gentle breeze, or while blowing softly, and the lighter shell fragments are carried away, leaving only the pure, roasted nibs behind. You are left with a bowl of dark brown, crunchy, and intensely aromatic cacao nibs. They are the pure essence of the bean, unlocked by fire. They look almost edible now, and if you were to pop one in your mouth, you would get a burst of bitter, complex, and crunchy flavor, not sweet, but recognizably chocolate. The spirit of the bean, awakened in fermentation, has now been given its voice by the fire, but it's not a drink yet. To achieve that, it must be broken down, silenced, and ground into a smooth, silent paste, and for that, you need the song of the grinding stone. You move to another part of the courtyard, where a different kind of culinary work is underway. Here, several women are kneading on reed mats on the ground, each before a formidable-looking piece of equipment. This is the meat-ate, the ancient and essential grinding stone of Mesoamerican cuisine. It's not just a simple mortar and pestle. The meat is a heavy, canted slab of vesicular basalt, volcanic rock, supported by 3 short, sturdy legs. Paired with it is the mono, a stone rolling pin, also carved from basalt. This tool is the foundation of the Aztec kitchen. Used to grind everything from maize for tortillas to pigments for paint. And today, it's being used to pulverize the cacao nibs into a paste. Woman gestures for you to kneel beside her. She places a handful of the roasted, winnowed cacao nibs onto the top of her meat. The process begins. She grips the mono with both hands and begins to roll and press it against the nibs, using the weight of her upper body to apply pressure. The sound that fills the air is a gritty, rhythmic scraping and crunching, the song of the grinding stone. It's hard, repetitive work. Your own attempt is clumsy. You struggle to apply even pressure, and the nibs skitter away from the mono. The woman, however, moves with a hypnotic, practiced rhythm, her body swaying as she grinds the nibs back and forth. Slowly, something magical happens. The dry, crunchy nibs begin to break down. As they are ground finer and finer, the friction and pressure begin to warm the stone. This warmth is critical. Cacao nibs are roughly 50% fat, what we now call cocoa butter. As the nibs are crushed and warmed, this fat begins to release. The gritty, crumbly texture starts to transform. The ground nibs begin to clump together, turning from a dry powder into a thick, oily, and surprisingly smooth paste. This is pure, unadulterated chocolate liquor, not alcoholic, despite the name, but the liquid essence of the being. The woman doesn't stop. She continues to grind, her movements relentless, scraping the paste from the mono and the sides of the meat and working it back into the center. The goal is to achieve a texture that is as smooth and fine as possible. Any grittins in the final drink would be a sign of a hasty or unskilled preparation. This process could take hours, a testament to the incredible labor that went into a single cup of the final beverage. This is the established, well-documented method for creating the chocolate paste. But here's where a bit of a niche debate enters the picture among food historians and archaeologists. Was the meat always heated? Some sources suggest that for grinding cacao, a small fire would be lit underneath the meat. This external heat source would keep the stone consistently warm, making it much easier to release the cocoa butter and achieve a perfectly smooth, liquid paste. You can imagine how this would transform the task from a brute force grinding process into a more fluid, almost painterly one. As the chocolate melts onto the stone, evidence for this is found in the analysis of some ancient meat which show signs of sustained heat exposure. But it's not universal. Was this a common technique or a special trick used only by the most elite kitchens? Was it even for cacao at all? Or for some other food? It's one of those tantalizing how-to details that remains a subject of ongoing discussion. You watch, mesmerized, as the gritty nibs are completely transformed into a dark, glossy, and fragrant mass. The aroma is now at its peak, intensely rich, earthy, and complex. The woman scrapes the finished paste from the stone into a small clay bowl. It's warm and semi-liquid. As it cools, it will harden into a solid block of what we would call unsweetened baking chocolate. These blocks are easier to store and transport within the city. When it's time to make the drink, a piece of this block will be broken off and dissolved in water. You witness the bean's complete physical deconstruction. It has been fermented, dried, roasted, chilled, and now ground into oblivion. It is no longer a bean. It is a potential, a blank slate of pure, bitter chocolate flavor. But the Aztecs rarely, if ever, consumed it plain. Its true character was yet to be defined. Now comes the art of the perfumer, the chef, the priest. Now it's time to decide what this chocolate wants to be. And for that, you need a world of spices. The bowl of dark, fragrant cacao paste sits before you, the foundation of the drink. Now, the kitchen transforms from a place of brute force processing into something more like an apothecary or a perfumer's workshop. The woman who ground the paste now turns to a collection of small clay pots and woven baskets, each containing a different, carefully prepared ingredient. This is where the XO Cola TL gets its soul and its signature kit. This is not about adding a pinch of this or that. It's a deliberate and highly symbolic act of flavor creation. First, and perhaps most famously, she reaches for the chili peppers. But these aren't just any chilies. She has several varieties, dried and ground into fine powders, ranging from a smoky, mild red to a fiery, sharp orange. The use of chili is one of the most well-known facts about the Aztec drink. The capsaicin from the peppers would have provided a warming, stimulating sensation that complemented the natural effects of the theobromine in the cacao. It was just for flavor. It was part of the drink's power. She adds a careful spoonful of a deep red chili powder to the cacao paste, blending it in. Next, she unrolls a small bundle of what looked like long, thin, black pods. The moment she opens it, a sweet, intoxicating, and utterly familiar aroma fills the air. It's vanilla. The Teutonic people of the Gulf Coast were the original masters of vanilla cultivation, and it was a highly prized tribute item for the Aztecs. The vanilla orchid's pod, or bean, was fermented and dried in a lengthy process, much like cacao itself, to develop its signature flavor. Its sweetness was not a sugary sweetness, but an aromatic one, adding a smooth, fragrant counterpoint to the bitterness of the cacao and the heat of the chili. But the flavorings didn't stop there. This is where the popular understanding often ends. But the Aztec palate was far more complex. She points to a bowl of finely ground, reddish powder. This, she explains, is from the cacao tree, also known as annatto. It doesn't have a strong flavor, but it imparts a vibrant, blood-red color to the drink. A drink's appearance was just as important as its taste. A rich, red-tinted XO Cola TL was visually impressive, hinting at its sacred, and sometimes sacrificial, associations. Then come the flowers. This is a wonderfully strange and often overlooked detail of Aztec cuisine. They used a wide variety of aromatic flowers to perfume their chocolate. The woman shows you several dried blossoms. There's Tionacazolady, the flower of the gods, which had a spicy, peppery scent reminiscent of black pepper. There was Mecazocatl, the string flower, related to black pepper, which added a different kind of pungent, herbal note. And most prized of all was Tealozacatl, the vanilla orchid itself, though other blossoms were used to create a complex floral bouquet. Thinking of chocolate mixed with pepper, vanilla, and flower petals is a world away from a modern hot cocoa. One key ingredient often added wasn't for flavor at all, but for texture and substance. A small amount of finely ground maize, or cornmeal, was frequently mixed in. This acted as a thickener, giving the final drink more body and making it more substantial. It was a caloric booster, turning the drink from a simple beverage into a nourishing, liquid food. This is a well-documented practice. But what about sweetness? Did they have sugar? No. The granulated sugar we know, derived from sugarcane, was unknown in the Americas before the arrival of the Europeans. So was the drink always fiercely bitter and spicy? Not necessarily. This is a point of some academic contention. While the drink was certainly never sweet in the modern sense, the Aztecs did have access to sweeteners. The most common was honey, harvested from native stingles bees. More valuable still was the syrup made from the sap of the agave plant, the same plant used to make alcuin, much later, tequila. So, could a nobleman request his XO Cola TL with a dash of agave syrup to temper the bitterness? It's highly likely. The idea of a universally unsweetened drink is probably an oversimplification. The level of sweetness, spiciness, and other flavorings was likely customized to the preference of the person drinking it, much like ordering a complex coffee today. The standard recipe probably varied greatly from palace to palace, and from ceremony to ceremony. The woman has now finished her work. The original cacao paste has been transformed into a complex, multi-layered preparation, infused with chili, vanilla, and other spices. It's a dark, potent, and aromatic mixture, but it's still a solid paste. The final, and perhaps most theatrical, step is yet to come. It's time to add water and Most importantly, to create the most prized element of all, the froth. The spiced cacao paste is ready. It's a testament to a long journey and meticulous preparation. But it's not yet exocolatl. The final transformation requires water and air. A younger woman takes the bowl of prepared paste and brings it to a large, beautifully decorated cylindrical clay jar. She adds a measure of cool water. Note hut. This is a crucial distinction. The Aztec drink was generally served cool or at room temperature, not as the steaming hot chocolate we envision. The heat would come from the chili. Note the water. She begins to stir the mixture with a wooden paddle, breaking up the paste and allowing it to dissolve into the water. The water slowly turns a deep, rich, and opaque brown, colored by the cacao and the redacio. Just mixing it isn't enough. The defining characteristic of a perfectly prepared exocolatl, the absolute mark of luxury and skill, was a thick, persistent, and beautiful head of foam. And creating this foam was an art form. She puts down the paddle. She picks up another vessel, a tall, spouted pot, looking almost like a modern-day pitcher, also made of painted clay. Then, she begins the performance. Holding the large jar in one hand, she raises the pitcher high above her head. In a steady, confident stream, she pours the chocolate mixture from the pitcher back into the jar below. The dark liquid travels a distance of 3 or 4 feet through the air before splashing back into the main vessel. She repeats this over and over, pouring from high to low, low to high, transferring the liquid back and forth between the two pots. It seems purely theatrical, a dramatic flourish for the sake of presentation. But it's a brilliant, low-tech method for aeration. As the liquid falls through the air and crashes into the surface below, it traps thousands of tiny air bubbles. The natural fats and solids in the cacao mixture stabilize these bubbles, and slowly, a thick, light brown foam begins to build on the surface. This is the goal. The deeper, richer, and more stable the foam, the more expertly prepared the drink. A master preparer could create a foam so thick it could almost be eaten with a spoon, supporting a flower blossom placed on its surface. This pouring method is the most commonly depicted technique in ancient codices and is considered the standard way of frothing the drink. However, there's another tool that was likely used, a fascinating piece of Aztec technology called a mole in hilo. It's a wooden whisk or frother, often intricately carved, with a slender handle and a bulbous, ridge, or paddle-like end. You would hold the handle between your palms and spin it rapidly back and forth in the liquid, like trying to start a fire with a stick. The spinning head would agitate the liquid violently, whipping air into it and creating a froth. Here's where a slight historical debate arises. While the mole in hilo is now iconic and inextricably linked with traditional Mexican hot chocolate, some scholars argue that its prominence and intricate design might be a post-conquest development, influenced by Spanish tools. The evidence for its widespread use in the pre-Hispanic Aztec era for frothing chocolate is less definitive than the pouring method. Codices almost exclusively show the pouring technique. So, was the mole in hilo a common tool in Moctezuma escort? Or was it a more niche instrument that became popular later on? The pouring method was undoubtedly the primary, most dramatic technique, but the existence and role of a dedicated frothing stick in the Aztec era remains a point of subtle scholarly discussion. You watch the woman as she finishes her pouring. The top of the jar is now crowned with a magnificent, dense layer of foam. Inches thick, the drink is ready. The aroma is complex. Chocolate, chili, vanilla, and something floral, all mingling together. She carefully ladles the liquid, along with a generous topping of the precious foam, into a small, beautifully painted cup, or cara, made from a polished gourd. The cup has no handle. It's meant to be cradled in the hands. It is finally complete. This is exocolatl. But it's not for you. This cup is destined for someone who has earned the right to drink it through courage and skill in battle. It is fuel for the Empire's defenders. The exquisite cup of frothed chocolate, cradled in its gorgy cara, is not heading for the Emperor's chambers. Not yet. It's carried with purpose through the stone corridors and courtyards to a different part of the city. the barracks and training grounds of the Empire's most feared warriors. The air here is charged with a disciplined energy. You see men, their bodies lean and powerful, practicing with weapons. The dull thud of the macuet you tell, a wooden club edged with lethally sharp obsidian blades, striking a practiced dummy echoes in the courtyard. You are entering the world of the Aztec military elite, specifically the prestigious warrior societies known as the Jaguar Warriors, Bo Silopilai, and the Eagle Warriors, Ciueapilai. These were not just soldiers, they were a class of nobility earned through battlefield prowess. A commoner who captured a certain number of enemies in battle could be elevated to this status, gaining wealth, land, and privileges. Their appearance is striking. They wear elaborate costumes fashioned from the pelts of jaguars or adorned with eagle feathers, outfits that were both a uniform and a testament to their spiritual power. A group of these warriors, fresh from a grueling training session, are gathered in a hall. They are preparing for a campaign, a battle to expand the Empire's borders or to quell a rebellious province. And part of their preparation, part of their ritual, is the consumption of exocolatiel. A priest, accompanying the preparers, presents the cups of the dark, foamy liquid to the warriors. This is a well-established historical fact. The drink was a vital part of military life. It was, in modern terms, the original high-performance energy drink. One of the Jaguar warriors takes the cup. He drinks it not with the leisurely pace of a nobleman at a feast, but with a focused intensity. The combination of theobromine and caffeine, naturally present in the cacao, was a powerful stimulant. It increased alertness, quickened the heart rate, and fought off fatigue. The chili added another layer of stimulation, a heat that coursed through the body, and the maize thickener provided real, sustained energy from carbohydrates. It was a perfectly engineered pre-battle fuel, designed to make a warrior more focused, more energetic, and more formidable in combat. The Spanish friar Bernardino de Sahagun, whose writings are one of our richest sources on Aztec life, noted that the drink, when consumed in large quantities, could be intoxicating and cause the drinker to be demented or deranged. This was necessarily seen as a negative side effect in a military context. The drink was believed to instill a sort of divine frenzy, a fearlessness that was essential for the brutal, close-quarters combat at the time. The warrior was just drinking a beverage. He was consuming courage. But here's a more unusual, and somewhat debated, aspect of the drink's military use. Some interpretations of Aztec art and texts suggest that exocolatiel was sometimes mixed with something much more potent, hallucinogenic mushrooms. This would have transformed the drink from a mere stimulant into a powerful psychoactive substance, used in specific pre-battle rituals to connect the warrior with the gods of war, to grant them visions, and to eliminate all fear of death. The evidence for this is largely circumstantial, found in artistic depictions and interpretations of ritual texts. And it's a controversial topic among historians. Was this a widespread practice for elite warriors, or a rare, highly secretive ritual reserved for only the most sacred campaigns? The line between historical fact and speculation is very thin here. It's a chilling thought. Warriors heading into battle not just energized, but in an altered state of consciousness. As the warrior finishes his cup, he sets the gourd down with a firm, final gesture. You see a change in his demeanor. The quiet, focused intensity settles over him. He seems larger, more present. The belief in the drink's power was as important as its chemical effects. He believed he had just consumed the strength of the jaguar, the fire of the chili, and the energy of the gods. He was ready for war. Watching these elite soldiers, you understand that exocolatiel is far more than a luxury item. It is a strategic resource, as vital to the Aztec war machine as obsidian for their blades or cotton for their armor. It fuels the soldiers who conquer the provinces that, in turn, pay tribute in the very cacao beans used to make the drink. It's a perfect, self-sustaining cycle of power. And at the very top of this cycle sits one man who consumes more of it than anyone else in the empire, the emperor himself. Leaving the Stark, disciplined world of the warriors behind. You are now granted a glimpse into the nerve center of the empire, the opulent palace of the Huitani, the great speaker, Moctezuma II. The transition is jarring. The air of martial intensity gives way to a perfumed, almost serene atmosphere of immense power and wealth. The palace is a sprawling complex of rooms, courtyards, and gardens. You see polished stone walls, intricately carved wooden screens, and nobles walking silently in fine cotton cloaks, their faces impassive. You are led to a great hall where the emperor is dining, but he is not dining with a crowd. He sits alone on a low, richly cushioned throne, separated from all others by a beautifully decorated screen. This is a key detail noted by the Spanish conquerors who witnessed it. The emperor ate in solitary splendor. His food was served by high-ranking noble women who approached with their eyes downcast, speaking only in whispers. Hundreds of different dishes were prepared for him daily, served on fine red and black Cholula pottery, and kept warm on portable braziers. He samples a few dishes, and what he does not eat is distributed among his honor guard and the other nobles of the court. But your focus is on what he is drinking. After his meal, the main event begins. Servants appear, not with the simple gorgeous era of the warriors, but with something far more precious. They carry golden goblets, intricately worked by the finest goldsmiths in the land. And these goblets are filled with the finest cacao. The scene, as described by eyewitnesses like Bernal Diaz del Castillo, is one of almost unbelievable extravagance. He wrote that they brought him in cups of pure gold, a certain drink made from cacao. He claimed that Moctezuma was served more than 50 pitchers of the froth chocolate throughout the day. While 50 pitchers is almost certainly an exaggeration, a classic case of a conquest art for embellishing the tale to emphasize the wealth they had conquered. The core of the story is true. The emperor's consumption of cacao was legendary and prodigious. The chocolate served to the emperor was the absolute pinnacle of the art. It would have been made from the highest quality beans, sorts from the most prized regions, perfectly roasted and ground to an impossibly smooth consistency. The flavorings would have been the most expensive and exotic. The best vanilla, the most fragrant flowers, perhaps a hint of precious honey or agave syrup to soften the edge. It was served in multiple varieties. Some accounts mention reddish chocolate, likely colored with achio, and others speak of different spices and preparations. It was a daily ritual of immense political and symbolic importance. By drinking it from a golden cup, Moctezuma was consuming the wealth of his empire in its most potent, liquid form. Here's a quirky and slightly racy tidbit from the historical accounts. The Spanish chroniclers were particularly interested in why the emperor seemed to drink so much of his chocolate right before visiting his harem. They repeatedly described cacao as a powerful aphrodisiac, a belief that they would carry back to Europe and which would stick with chocolate for centuries. Was this true? Chemically, there's not much to support it. Theobromine is a stimulant, not a true aphrodisiac, but the Aztec belief in its power was strong. They associated the energy, vitality, and heat it produced with virility. So, did Moctezuma drink it for this purpose? It's impossible to know his true intentions, but the perception of it as a love potion is one of those fascinating cultural attributions that historians find so intriguing. The belief was likely more powerful than the actual chemical effect. There is a debate among historians about the sheer logistics of this. If the emperor really did consume such vast quantities, the imperial storerooms must have been immense. Some calculations suggest that the annual tribute of cacao beans to Tenochtitlan could have been close to 1,000 tons. The palace would have had vast warehouses dedicated solely to storing these beans, protecting them from moisture and pests. The preparation would have required a dedicated, full-time staff of dozens of highly skilled women, working from dawn till dusk, just to meet the demands of the emperor and his court. The consumption of cacao was just a personal habit. It was a state-run industrial-scale operation. You watch as the emperor finishes another golden goblet. He does so with a quiet, regal grace. For him, this is not just a drink. It is his right. It is a symbol of his divine mandate to rule. It is a liquid manifestation of his power over the vast, complex, and wealthy empire that he commands from the solitary throne. And as with all things sacred in the Aztec world, this divine substance must also be shared with its original owners, the gods themselves. Your journey now takes you to the most sacred place in the entire empire, a place of profound awe and fear, the great temple of Tenochtitlan, the Temple of Mayor. This was not a single temple, but a massive ceremonial precinct at the physical and spiritual center of the city, and indeed, the Aztec universe. At its heart stood a colossal stepped pyramid with two shrines at its summit, one dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of sun and war, painted in stark reds and whites, the other to Telica, the god of rain and fertility, adorned in blues and whites. The air here is thick with the smell of copal incense, a fragrant tree resin that burns with a white, purifying smoke. The sounds of the bustling city seem to fall away, replaced by the rhythmic chanting of priests and the low beat of a ceremonial drum. You see priests with their long, matted hair, their bodies painted black, and their earlobes tattered from ritual bloodletting. They move with a solemn purpose that is both mesmerizing and unsettling. You are here to witness an offer. In Aztec cosmology, the gods were not distant, benevolent beings. They were powerful, hungry entities who needed to be nourished by humans to keep the cosmos in balance. They craved chalk, like water, or precious water, the life force found in blood. This is the context for the infamous practice of human sacrifice, which was central to their state religion. But while blood was the most potent offering, other valuable and sacred substances were also given to the gods, and among the most important of these was Quetzalcoatl. You watch as a high priest, adorned in magnificent feathered regalia, ascends the steep steps of the pyramid. He carries not a golden goblet, but a simple, sacred vessel. In his other hand, he holds a ceremonial bowl filled with the frothed chocolate drink. This is not the customized, spiced beverage of the emperor's court. This is a pure formulation, prepared according to strict ritual laws. Its purpose is not pleasure, but divine appeasement. At the top of the pyramid, before the idol of one of the gods, a terrifying figure carved from stone and adorned with precious materials. The ritual begins. The priest chants in the Nahuatl language, his voice rising and falling in a hypnotic cadence. He raises the bowl of Quetzalcoatl to the four cardinal directions, and then to the heavens and the earth, sanctifying the offering. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he pours the dark, precious liquid onto the altar or directly at the feet of the idol. The chocolate runs down the stone, a dark stain that is quickly absorbed. He is feeding the god. He is returning the bitter water to the divine realm from which it came. This practice is well documented in Aztec codices and Spanish accounts. Archaeologists have even found residue of cacao in ceremonial vessels excavated from the Temple of Mayor ruins in modern-day Mexico City, providing direct physical evidence of its use in these rituals. The drink was seen as a divine substance, a food of the gods, so it was only logical to offer it back to them. But here's a more peculiar and less discussed detail. Cacao was also used as part of the ritual preparation for those who were to be sacrificed. In some ceremonies, the person chosen for sacrifice would be treated as a living embodiment of a god for a period of time. They would be dressed in fine clothes, honored, and given the best food and drink. This included copious amounts of Quetzalcoatl. It's a strange, almost compassionate detail in a brutal process. Was this to honor them, to sedate them, or to make them a more divine and worthy offering? The exact reasoning is complex and debated by scholars of Aztec religion. It's a chilling intersection of luxury and death, where the most prized beverage is used to prepare someone for their final, sacred duty. The ceremony on the pyramid continues. After the liquid offering, the priest might also burn dried cacao beans along with copal incense, the smoke carrying the chocolate's essence up to the heavens. It was a multi-sensory offering of sight, smell, and substance. You stand at the base of the Great Pyramid, looking up at the silhouette of the priest against the sky. You realize that the journey of the cacao bean is not just economic or political. It is fundamentally cosmic. It links the farmers in the jungle, the porters on the mountain paths, the merchants in the market, the warriors on the battlefield, and the emperor on his throne to this single, sacred spot. It is a substance that flows through every level of society. But its ultimate destination is the divine. It nourishes humans so they can, in turn, nourish the gods, ensuring that the sun will rise again tomorrow. But while its highest purpose is sacred, it also serves a more worldly, social function, as the ultimate status symbol at a nobleman's feast. Your understanding of Quetzalcoatl expands once more as you leave the solemnity of the temple precinct and enter the lively, celebratory atmosphere of a nobleman's feast. You've been invited to the home of a wealthy Pocteke merchant, one of the powerful traders who organized the long-distance caravans. He is hosting a banquet, not just to enjoy his wealth, but to display it, to cement his social standing, and to fulfill complex obligations to his community and his gods. These feasts were incredibly important social rituals, and they could be ruinously expensive, sometimes bankrupting the host. You enter a large, open-air courtyard, lit by flickering torches and fragrant with flowers. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of guests are gathered. They are fellow merchants, decorated warriors, and minor officials, all dressed in their finest embroidered cloaks and adorned with jewelry. The host greets everyone with elaborate, formal speeches, a key part of the etiquette. There is no large dining table. Instead, guests are seated on low stools or woven reed mats. The food begins to arrive. It's a lavish spread, demonstrating the host's connections and wealth. There are countless dishes of turkey, venison, and wild birds, all served with rich sauces. Urmadas, made from ground chilies, seeds, and spices. There are piles of tamales, steamed corn dough filled with meats or beans, and stacks of fresh tortillas. But everyone knows what the real finale of the evening will be. As the main meal winds down, a different kind of servant enters the courtyard. They move with a special grace, carrying trays of the tools for preparing Quetzalcoatl. The preparation is done in front of the guests, a piece of culinary theater. You see the women expertly frothing the chocolate using the dramatic pouring method, the dark liquid oozing through the torchlight. This is a deliberate display of skill and quality. The host wants everyone to see that his chocolate is being prepared fresh, by experts, and that the foam is thick and luxurious. The frothed chocolate is then served, again in those beautiful, handleless cacao gourds, which are often intricately painted or carved for the occasion. The host might even give these valuable cups away to his most important guests as party favors, a further sign of his immense generosity and wealth. This serving of Quetzalcoatl is the climax of the feast. It's the equivalent of popping open the finest champagne at a modern gala. To be able to serve dozens, or even hundreds, of guests this precious drink was the ultimate status symbol. It demonstrated that the host had access to vast quantities of the coin of the realm and could afford to simply drink it. Here's a curious piece of social etiquette that is often overlooked. How did you drink it? According to Spanish chroniclers, there was a very specific and polite way to consume Quetzalcoatl at a feast. You were meant to hold the gourd cup with your right hand, and before drinking, you would dip the fingers of your left hand into the foam and flick a tiny amount onto the ground as a small, personal offering to the earth. Then, you would drink, but not all at once. You would sip it slowly and thoughtfully, savoring the complex flavors. After drinking, you didn't just put the cup down. You were expected to hold it, cradling it, while engaging in conversation. It was a social prop, a sign that you were part of the privileged group partaking in the host's generosity. However, there's a historical debate about who, exactly, was allowed to drink. The standard narrative is that Quetzalcoatl was strictly for the nobility, priests, and warriors. Commoners were forbidden from consuming it. But how strict was this prohibition? Some historians argue that it might have been less of a rigid law and more of a practical economic barrier. Cacao was simply too expensive for a common farmer or laborer to afford on a regular basis. To the commoner, if they somehow acquired the beans, make it at home. Possibly, but it would have been a massive extravagance. Others suggest that commoners might have been allowed to drink it on very specific, sanctioned occasions, perhaps at a wedding or a religious festival, as a gift from a wealthier patron. The idea of an absolute, legally enforced ban is likely an oversimplification of a more complex social and economic reality. As the night wears on, more and more chocolate is served. The mood in the courtyard becomes more animated. The stimulating effect of the drink loosens tongues and elevates the conversation. The host has succeeded. His guests are impressed. His social standing is affirmed, and his obligations are met. You realize, sipping your own cup, that this drink is a social lubricant, a political tool, and an economic statement all in one. It's a beverage that operates on every level of society, from the most sacred rituals to this very worldly display of power and prestige. And for some, it was even considered a form of medicine. The feast winds down, but the effects of the exocola linger. You feel a pleasant warmth in your chest from the chili and a clean, sharp alertness in your mind from the cocoa itself. It's not the jittery buzz of modern coffee. It's a smoother, more sustained energy. You feel revitalized, not just socially satisfied. It's easy to see how a drink that makes you feel this good could be seen as more than just a beverage. It feels like a tonic, like medicine. Curious about this, you seek out a cacao, an Aztec physician. You are led to a quiet room, away from the main courtyards of the great house. This is the healer's domain. It smells of dried herbs, copal incense, and the faint, earthy scent of clay. Bundles of plants hang from the ceiling, and neatly organized pots contain powders, minerals, and dried animal parts. It's a place of knowledge, a library of remedies. The cacao, an old woman with calm, knowing eyes, is grinding ingredients on a small, clean metate. She sees your interest in the cacao and nods. She explains that exocola is indeed one of her most important tools, but not always in the way the nobles drink it. For her, it is a powerful medicine. This is a widely accepted fact. The Aztecs had a sophisticated understanding of the medicinal properties of plants, and cacao was a star player in their pharmacopoeia. She tells you that a warm, gruel-like version of the drink, often made with more maize flour, is a sovereign remedy for stomach ailments, for an upset stomach, for diarrhea, for indigestion. A dose of this cacao gruel is prescribed to soothe the belly and provide strength. The natural fats in the cacao and the gentle coating of the maize would have a genuinely palliative effect. It was also used as a general tonic for those suffering from listlessness, fatigue, or depression. For someone who was wasting away, a daily cup of nourishing, stimulating exocola could help restore their appetite and spirit. Then, you see her do something interesting. She takes the rich cacao paste she has just ground and begins to mix it with another substance, a coarse, greenish powder made from an incredibly bitter-smelling root. She is preparing a medicine for a patient with a fever. She explains that the root is the real medicine, but its taste is vile. So foul that most patients would refuse to take it. But the cacao changes everything. This is the quirky, brilliant insight of the Aztec healer. Cacao, with its own powerful and complex bitterness, its aromatic punch of chili and vanilla, is the perfect vehicle for delivering other, less palatable medicines. It's the original flavor masking agent. The strong taste of the chocolate doesn't erase the bitterness of the herb, but it envelops it, making it part of a more complex and tolerable flavor profile. It makes the medicine not just effective, but possible to administer. This leads to a fascinating area of debate for ethnobotanists and historians. The Aztecs clearly used cacao as a medicine and as a delivery system. But how precise were their prescriptions? Did they have a standardized system of doses? The cacao tells you that for a stomachache, a single cup is needed. For a fever, a smaller dose of the herb-laced mixture is given 3 times a day. It seems simple, but was this knowledge uniform across the empire? Or was it the secret, proprietary knowledge of individual healers, passed down through apprenticeships? We have sources, like the Bad Enos manuscript, and illustrated Aztec herbal, that list remedies, but the exact dosages and preparations are often vague. The line between a medicinal dose and a toxic one was likely a skill learned through years of practice, more of an intuitive art than a codified science. The healer confirms this danger. She warns that not all cacao is healing. Cacao beans that are unripe or improperly fermented, what she calls green beans, are dangerous if they are ground and made into a drink. They can cause confusion, heart palpitations, and a kind of madness. The healer must be a master of her ingredients, able to distinguish a healthy, life-giving bean from a harmful one. You leave the healer's room with a new appreciation for the cacao bean. It is not just one thing. It is everything. It is the money in your pouch, the fuel for a warrior, the offering for a god, the status symbol at a feast, and the medicine that can soothe the stomach or deliver a cure. It is woven into the very fabric of life, health, and worship. Its power seems immense, its place in this world unshakable. But as you walk back out into the torchlit night, you hear whispers among the guards at the gate, faint, strange rumors carried by travelers from the coast, whispers of pale, bearded strangers who have arrived from the eastern sea in massive canoes with sails like clouds. A new kind of presence is in the land, a sickness for which the ticket ale has no cure. The whispers that were once confined to the city gates now creep into the markets and courtyards. They are stories of strange apparitions, of impossible things. The rumors coalesce around a single, chilling narrative. Pale-skinned men with hair on their faces, like wild beasts, have landed on the eastern coast, near the lands of the Teutonic Sea people. They arrived in floating houses or mountains that move on the water. They command strange, deer-like beasts that they ride upon like the wind, and they wield tubes that spit fire and make a sound like thunder. You are in the Tlatelolco market, and the mood is different. The usual vibrant hummus is undercut by a current of anxiety. People gather in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. A merchant who has just returned from the coast is the center of one such group, his face grim. He speaks of the strangers' shining armor that deflects arrows, and of their terrifying dogs, larger and more ferocious than the native hairless Solix Attenchable. This arrival, in the year 1 read of the Aztec calendar, or 1519 in the European one, is a moment of profound cosmic dread. It aligns with the ancient prophecy of the exiled god, Quetzalcoatl, who had promised to return from the east in a year of that very name. Was this pale, bearded leader, a man named Hernan Cortez, the feathered serpent come to reclaim his kingdom? This is the classic, long-accepted narrative that Moctezuma and the Aztec elite were paralyzed by religious superstition, believing Cortez to be a returning god, which led them to welcome him instead of immediately destroying him. The emperor, it is said, sent emissaries to the coast bearing the ritual vestments of Quetzalcoatl, a mask of turquoise, a feathered cloak, as a gift, a test, and an act of appeasement. But in recent decades, many historians have begun to challenge this interpretation. This is a major point of scholarly debate. Was the Quetzalcoatl prophecy a genuine, pre-existing belief that dictated Moctezuma's actions? Or was it a story that was largely constructed after the conquest, by both the Spanish and by indigenous writers, to make sense of the almost unbelievable catastrophe that had occurred? The Spanish, for their part, found it a useful narrative because it framed their victory as divinely ordained. For the Aztecs, it helped explain how their mighty empire could have been brought down by a few hundred foreigners. The revisionist argument suggests that Moctezuma was not a paralyzed mystic, but a shrewd and calculating political leader facing an unprecedented and deeply confusing situation. He didn't know who these people were. They were not a known rival tribe. They wielded technology that was beyond comprehension. His response, sending emissaries, offering gifts, could be seen not as an act of worship, but as a standard diplomatic playbook. He was gathering intelligence. He was trying to figure out their intentions, their strengths, their weaknesses, He was trying to buy time. In the palace, the consumption of exocola likely increases. The drink, a tool for focus and divine consultation, is needed now more than ever. The emperor and his council of priests and nobles would have spent long nights drinking the bitter, stimulating beverage, trying to interpret the omens and devise a strategy. Do we welcome them? Do we ambush them? Do we offer them tribute and hope they leave? Every option was fraught with peril. You see the effect of this uncertainty on the city. The flow of tribute cacao from the coastal regions, now under the shadow of the Spanish, becomes less reliable. The prices in the market fluctuate. The conversations at feasts are no longer about social standing, but about survival. The world, which had seemed so stable, so ordered, now feels dangerously fragile. The strangers, against all advice and warnings, begin to march inland. They make alliances with the Aztec subjugated enemies, like the Tlaxcalans, who are bitter rivals and see the Spanish as a tool to overthrow their oppressors. The unstoppable force is now on its way to Tenochtitlan. The city holds its breath. The emperor makes his decision. He will welcome them into the city, into his home. A strategy of containment. Perhaps keep your friends close, and your terrifying, possibly divine, daily on enemies closer. The stage is set for one of history's most traumatic and tragic cultural encounters, and as part of this encounter, the strangers will be offered the most precious substance the empire has to give. They will be given their first taste of exocola. The day arrives. The small army of Spanish conquistadors, along with their thousands of Tlaxcalan allies, marches across the Great Causeway and into the heart of Tenochtitlan. The scene is one of surreal tension and spectacle. The Aztecs, in their finest feathered cloaks, line the causeway, staring in silent awe and apprehension at the armored men, the powerful horses, animals they had never seen before, and the grim-faced indigenous allies. You are watching from a rooftop as Moctezuma himself, carried on a magnificent litter adorned with gold and quetzal feathers, goes out to meet Hernan Cortez. The two leaders exchange gifts. There is a strained attempt at diplomacy, conducted through translators, a shipwrecked Spaniard and an Ahua woman known as Loma Linchi, who would become one of history's most pivotal and controversial figures. The Spanish are housed in one of the city's grand palaces. Moctezuma, in an act of extraordinary hospitality or a fatal strategic error, treats them as honored guests. He orders a great feast to be prepared for them. All the lavish dishes of the Aztec elite are brought forth: roasted turkey, venison, endless varieties of tamales and tortillas, and then comes the grand finale, the offering intended as the highest honor, the exocola. Imagine the scene from the perspective of a Spanish soldier, HS exhausted, wary, and deeply suspicious, surrounded by a civilization that feels utterly alien. He has seen their temples, which he considers pagan dens of devil worship. He has seen their priests, who look to him like terrifying sorcerers. Now, a noble woman approaches him, holding a polished gourd cup filled with a thick, frothy, reddish-brown liquid that he has never seen before. It's served cool, not hot. It smells strange, earthy, spicy, and a little bit floral. He takes a hesitant sip. The reaction is, for most of the Spaniards, one of utter bewilderment and disgust. What is this stuff? It's profoundly bitter. It's gritty from the ground corn. It's spicy from the chili, a sensation many Europeans had never experienced. There is no sugar, no sweetness to soften the blow. To their palates, accustomed to wine and simple peasant fare, it is an aggressive, unpleasant concoction. One of the chroniclers later described it as a drink for pigs, a sentiment likely shared by many of his comrades in that moment. They taste it, they grimace, and they push it aside. They simply do not understand it. They lack the entire cultural context, the mythology, the ritual significance, the acquired taste that makes it the most precious substance in the empire. This initial rejection is a well-documented part of the story. The Spanish did not immediately fall in love with chocolate. But here's a small, curious detail. While the common soldiers found it repulsive, Some of the leaders, including Cortes himself, were more observant. They might not have liked the taste, but they noticed its effects. They saw that the Aztec nobles and warriors who drank it seemed to be refreshed, their fatigue banished. A brilliant and ruthless strategist was interested in anything that could give his men an edge. He noted its stimulating properties. He also, more importantly, noticed its economic significance. He saw the Aztecs using the beans as currency and saw the vast storerooms filled with them in Moctezuma's palace. He might not have seen a delicacy, but he definitely saw value. There's an ongoing discussion among historians about this first tasting. Was the XO coal at TL served to the Spanish the standard recipe, or was it a special preparation? Did the Aztecs, knowing the Spanish were not accustomed to it, perhaps alter the recipe? Maybe they toned down the chili or added a touch of honey, trying to make it more palatable. Or did they serve them to full strength? Unadulterated warriors brew as a kind of test. The chronicles don't specify these details, leaving us to wonder about the precise flavor profile of that momentous and ultimately disappointing first sip. The Spanish soldier, having rejected the bitter water, asks for wine instead, a drink the Aztecs do not have. This small moment is a perfect metaphor for the larger tragedy unfolding. It's a complete failure of communication, a clash of two worlds encapsulated in a single cup. The Aztecs offer their most sacred treasure, and the Spanish literally don't have the taste for it. They cannot perceive its value. This misunderstanding, this inability to see the world through the other's eyes, will define the brutal events to come. For now, the rejected cups of XO coal TL sit there, their precious foam slowly dissolving, a silent testament to a cultural gap that will prove impossible to bridge. The bitter water has been tasted by the outsiders, and they have found it wanting. But the bean itself, the source of the bitterness, will soon embark on a new journey, one that will take it across an ocean and into a completely different world. The story of the conquest is swift, brutal, and tragic. The strained peace in Tenochtitlan shatters. Moctezuma becomes a hostage and dies under mysterious circumstances. The Spanish are driven from the city in a bloody retreat, only to return with a larger army and besiege the magnificent island capital. Disease, specifically smallpox, brought knowingly by the Europeans, ravages the Aztec population, who have no natural immunity. In 1521, Tenochtitlan falls. The great empire is shattered. Its temples are torn down, and a new city, Mexico City, begins to rise from the ruins. In the aftermath of this devastation, the Spanish become the new masters of the land, and they are primarily interested in one thing: wealth. Their first obsession is gold and silver, which they plunder from the palaces and melt down, destroying priceless works of art. But as the dust settles and they begin the long, difficult process of governing their new colony, they start to pay attention to the other forms of wealth that this land has to offer, and they keep coming back to those little brown beans. Cortes and his more astute lieutenants had noticed the cacao bean's role as currency. In the chaos of the post-conquest world, the indigenous economic system, while damaged, didn't just disappear. People still used cacao beans to buy and sell goods in the local markets. The Spanish, ever pragmatic, realized that controlling the cacao trade meant controlling the local economy. So, they took over the tribute system. The cacao-growing regions that once paid tribute to Moctezuma now paid tribute to the Spanish crown or to individual conquistadors who were granted vast estates. So the cacao bean begins its journey across the Atlantic, but not primarily as a foodstuff. At first, it travels as a curiosity, a sample of the strange flora of the New World. Imagine a Spanish nobleman in Seville or Madrid receiving a small pouch of these hard, brown beans. H.S. heard stories of them being used as money by the natives. He might even hear the tale of the bitter, spicy drink they make. He might try to replicate it, grinding the beans and mixing them with water and perhaps some pepper. As per the descriptions, he would taste it and, like the soldiers in Tenochtitlan, likely find it unpleasant and barbaric. This is a key part of the bean's journey, its initial failure to launch as a culinary product. It arrived in Spain in the 1520s, but for several decades, it remained a botanical curiosity, a colonial commodity with a defined monetary value in the Americas, but no real place in European society. It was not an immediate sensation, unlike other New World discoveries like the tomato or the potato, which slowly found their way into the European diet. Chocolate was actively disliked in its original form. There's a subtle but important historical question here. Who were the first people to consistently consume chocolate in Spain? It was the royal court or the high nobility. The most likely candidates were the conquistadors themselves, returning to Spain after years in the Americas. Having lived in the New World, some of them may have acquired the taste, or at least an appreciation for its stimulating effects. They might have continued to drink it out of habit, or perhaps as a way to show off their exotic experiences. Another group were the Spanish friars and missionaries who followed the conquerors. They were scholars and observers, meticulously documenting the local cultures. They learned about the medicinal uses of cacao and were likely among the first to experiment with its preparation in a systematic way. But there was a problem. Even if you were an adventurous Spaniard willing to try it, the drink was still associated with the pagan rituals of the Aztecs. This was a significant hurdle in the deeply Catholic society of 16th century Spain. Was it morally acceptable to consume a drink so closely tied to human sacrifice and devil worship? This was a real theological debate. Some church officials condemned it. However, the argument that ultimately won out was that the drink itself was a natural gift from God. It was the Aztec rituals that were pagan. By consuming it in a Christian context, you were cleansing it of its dark past. This justification was crucial. It opened the door for chocolate to be accepted. So for decades, the cacao bean existed in a kind of limbo in Spain. It was a currency in the colonies, a curiosity at home, a subject of theological debate, and a niche beverage for a handful of ex-colonials and inquisitive friars. It was a product waiting for a reinvention. The key to unlocking its potential was sitting right there on the tables of every wealthy European. Sugar, the meeting of the bitter bean from the New World and the sweet crystals from the Old World, was about to happen. And the place where this magical fusion would occur was, most likely, within the quiet walls of a Spanish monastery. The scene shifts from the sun-baked plazas of Mexico to the cool, quiet cloisters of a Spanish monastery, perhaps somewhere in Andalusia where the ships from the New World would dock. Within these stone walls, life is a blend of prayer, labor, and scholarship. The monks here are men of routine, but they are also often intellectually curious, surrounded by libraries and well-versed in the arts of herbalism and alchemy. And it is to these monasteries that many of the strange new products from the Americas are sent for study and classification. A crate of cacao beans arrives, a gift from a returning missionary or a tithe from a colonial estate. The monks, who have likely read the reports from their brothers in New Spain, know what it is. They know its pagan associations, but they also know of its reported medicinal benefits and its stimulating properties. They are in a unique position to experiment. They have time, they have scholarly resources, and, most importantly, they have kitchens that are also laboratories. You can imagine a monk, perhaps the monastery's infirmarian in charge of medicines, attempting to replicate the Aztec drink. He roasts the beans over a brazier, the unfamiliar but rich aroma filling the stone kitchen. He grinds them, perhaps not with a meat eat, but with a more familiar European mortar and pestle. He mixes the resulting paste with water and maybe a pinch of black pepper or cloves, trying to approximate the exotic spices described in the letters from across the sea. He tastes it. It's bitter, intense, interesting, but still foreign, still a little harsh. And then comes the moment of pure genius, the flash of inspiration that will change culinary history forever. On the shelf in the monastery kitchen is another rare and valuable commodity, sugar. At this time, sugar, derived from cane grown on plantations in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic islands, was still an expensive luxury, used sparingly, often treated as a spice or a medicine itself. The monk, perhaps thinking of how honey was used to make bitter herbal remedies more palatable, decides to add a spoonful of the precious crystals to the bitter chocolate mixture. He stirs it in, the sugar dissolving into the dark liquid. He takes another sip. Everything changes. The transformation is instantaneous and profound. The harsh, aggressive bitterness of the cacao doesn't disappear, but it is tamed, rounded, deepened. The sweetness provides a perfect counterbalance, unlocking a whole new dimension of flavor. The rich, fruity, and nutty notes of the cacao, previously masked by the bitterness, now sing. It's still recognizable as the same drink, but it has been civilized, harmonized. It's no longer a drink for pigs. It is a delicacy. This moment, this simple addition, is the single most important event in the history of chocolate's global journey. This is where cacao begins its transformation into chocolate. The monks, recognizing they have stumbled upon something special, would have refined the recipe. They swap out the unfamiliar chili pepper for more familiar warm spices like cinnamon and anise, which were already staples in European luxury cuisine. They might serve it warm, a more comforting and familiar concept for a European beverage. This sweet, spiced, warm version of the drink becomes the monastery's secret. It's served as a special treat for visiting bishops or wealthy patrons. It's used as a fortifying drink for elderly or infirm monks. The knowledge of this new preparation spreads slowly, from one religious house to another. This monastic network acted as the first distribution channel for the new, improved chocolate. There's a debate among food historians about the exact timeline and location of this pivotal innovation. Was it truly the monks in Spain, or could it have been the Spanish nuns in the convents of Mexico, who had more direct access to the ingredients and the indigenous knowledge? There is strong evidence that the convents of Oaxaca and Puebla became famous for their chocolate preparations, blending European and native techniques. The truth is likely that the innovation happened in parallel. In these secluded, creative kitchens on both sides of the Atlantic, there probably was a single inventor, but a gradual process of adaptation and refinement within the Spanish religious community. What is certain is that for the better part of a century, chocolate remained a Spanish secret. The Spanish crown, recognizing the economic potential, heavily controlled the cacao trade. The knowledge of how to transform the bitter bean into a delicious beverage was a closely guarded piece of culinary intelligence. While the rest of Europe knew of the strange Indian nut that the Spanish imported, they didn't know what to do with it. But secrets this delicious are impossible to keep forever. The sweet, dark liquid was about to leak out of the monasteries and palaces of Spain and take the rest of Europe by storm. For nearly 100 years, Spain successfully cornered the market on chocolate. They controlled the supply of cacao from their American colonies and, more importantly, they held the recipe, the secret of mixing it with sugar and spices. But the secret was too good to keep. It began to spill across the Pyrenees into France, often through royal marriages. When in Austria, a Spanish princess married King Louis XIII of France in 1615. She is said to have brought her love for the sweet, spiced chocolate drink with her, introducing it to the French court. Suddenly, this exotic beverage from the New World becomes the ultimate symbol of aristocratic luxury and sophisticated taste. You are now in the opulent halls of the Palace of Versailles in the late 17th century. The air is thick with perfume, powdered wigs, and courtly intrigue. Dear, drinking chocolate is not a simple pleasure. It is a highly ritualized performance. Special, delicate porcelain cups, often with a matching saucer to prevent spills on priceless silk gowns, are designed specifically for the beverage. The chocolate served here is a far cry from the cool, frothy, water-based drink of the Aztecs. It is rich, thick, and often made with milk instead of water, making it even more decadent. It's heavily sweetened with expensive cane sugar and perfumed with the most exotic spices. Vanilla and cinnamon are standard, but sometimes ambergris, a whale byproduct, or musk are added for an even more exotic and, to our noses, baffling aroma. It's served hot, as a morning beverage, a heavy drink to be sipped while one is still in their bedrobes, receiving important visitors. To be seen drinking chocolate is to signal that you are wealthy, fashionable, and connected. It's a conspicuous consumption of three incredibly expensive colonial goods at once: cacao from the Americas, sugar from the Caribbean, and spices from the East. It's the 17th century equivalent of posting a picture of yourself on a private jet. Its reputation as an aphrodisiac, a story that traveled with it from Moctezuma escort, only adds to its mystique and allure in the libertine atmosphere of the European aristocracy. But here's a funny, and often overlooked, defect of this craze. Because chocolate was still seen as a medicinal substance by many, it created a loophole for religious observance. During Lent, when devout Catholics were supposed to fast and abstain from rich foods and drinks, a debate raged. Was liquid chocolate considered a food or a drink? This was a serious theological question, debated by high-ranking cardinals. The final verdict, much to the delight of the aristocracy, was that since it was a liquid, it did not break the fast. This led to the slightly absurd situation where a nobleman could give up solid food, but still consume several cups of rich, caloric, and fortifying chocolate a day. It was a heavenly loophole, and they exploited it with gusto. The craze spreads from France to the other courts of Europe. It travels to Italy, where the Italians in cities like Venice and Turin become master cocktailers, creating their own unique blends. It makes its way to Austria and, eventually, to England. Each culture adapts it slightly. Some prefer it thicker, some sweeter, some more heavily spiced. But the core concept remains the same: a hot, sweet, rich, and intensely fashionable drink for the wealthy elite. The demand explodes. The Spanish can no longer control the supply. The French, the Dutch, and the English established their own cacao plantations in their colonies in the Caribbean and South America, often using enslaved African labor in brutal conditions to meet the insatiable European demand. The little bean that was once a sacred currency for the Aztecs has now become a driver of a new, globalized, and often violent colonial economy. You can feel the shift. The bean has been completely detached from its origins. No one in the court of Versailles knows of Quetzalcoatl or the Temple of Maya. They don't know about the metate or the pouring technique to create foam. The deep, sacred, and communal meaning of the drink has been stripped away, replaced by a new meaning, one of status, fashion, and indulgence. The bitter water of the warriors has been transformed into a sweet elixir for kings. But its journey is not over. Its next stop will be the bustling, smoky, and intellectual coffee houses of London, where it will fuel not just aristocrats, but revolutionaries and thinkers. Leave the gilded, perfumed halls of Versailles behind. Your journey with chocolate now takes you across the English Channel and into a world that smells not of perfume, but of coal smoke, damp wool, and ambition. You are in London, at the turn of the 18th century. This is not a city of aristocratic leisure. It's a bustling, chaotic hub of global commerce, sharp-witted debate, and relentless rain. The cobblestone streets are slick and crowded with merchants, sailors, clerks, and thinkers, all hurrying about their business. You push open the heavy wooden door of a building with a simple sign hanging outside. You are not entering a tavern or a private club. You are entering a London chocolate house. The air inside is warm, thick with tobacco smoke, and filled with a low, constant roar of male voices. The room is paneled in dark wood, and long wooden tables are crowded with men from various walks of life. This is the new public sphere of Europe, a place that is fundamentally different from the royal courts. These establishments, along with the more numerous coffee houses, were dubbed penny universities, because for the price of a single dish of chocolate or coffee, you could gain access to the latest news, read pamphlets on newsletters, and listen to the sharpest wits of the age debate politics, poetry, and finance. You find a seat at a shared table. A boy brings you a dish, not a cup, of steaming hot chocolate. It's thick, dark, still unsweetened by modern standards but certainly sugared, and served in a wide, shallow bowl, almost like a soup. It's nourishing, warming, and stimulating. Beside it, he places a small clay pipe and a bit of tobacco. All around you, Business is being conducted. Merchants are negotiating shipping contracts. Political activists are quietly distributing seditious pamphlets. A young writer in the corner is scribbling furiously, hoping to catch the eye of a wealthy patron. This is the mainstream historical understanding of these places. They were incubators of public opinion in modern capitalism. But here's the quirky, more specific detail. Your choice of chocolate house was not just a matter of taste. It was a political statement. The houses quickly became associated with specific political factions. For instance, the Waite's Chocolate House, which would later become a famous gentleman's club, was a notorious meeting spot for the Tory party. It was known for its deep, partisan political discussions and, even more so, for its high-stakes gambling. Men would famously bet on anything and everything, from the outcome of a battle to which of two raindrops would reach the bottom of a window pane first. If you were a member of the opposing Whig party, you wouldn't be caught dead in whites. You would go to the Cocoa Tree Chocolate House on Pall Mall. Dear, the political talk was just as fervent, but it was all in support of the Whig agenda. To enter one was to declare your allegiance. These were not neutral spaces. They were the unofficial headquarters of England's nascent political parties. This partisan nature of the chocolate houses is a fascinating insight into how a simple beverage became entangled in the fabric of political identity. This leads us to a point of academic debate. The romantic image of the penny university is one of perfect equality, a place where a humble clerk could debate with a powerful lord. But how true was this? Really? Many social historians now paint a more nuanced picture. While there was certainly more social mixing in a chocolate house than almost anywhere else in London society, they were not truly egalitarian. Social hierarchy still existed. Regular, high-status patrons had their favorite tables, which were implicitly reserved. A newcomer couldn't just sit down with the famous poet Alexander Pope or the essayist Joseph Addison and join their conversation. You had to be introduced, or earn your place through your wit and reputation. The idea of a completely flat social structure is likely an exaggeration. These were complex social ecosystems with their own unwritten rules and pecking orders. You sit there, nursing your dish of chocolate, listening to the cacophony of ideas, arguments, then laughter. You realize you're witnessing another profound shift. Chocolate is no longer the exclusive property of the absolute monarchy. It has moved into the commercial, political, and intellectual world of the rising middle class. It's fueling the debates that will shape nations and the business deals that will build empires. It has become democratized, in a sense, but it is still a luxury. And more importantly, it is still a liquid. It is a beverage to be prepared and consumed in a specific way. But the world is on the cusp of a new age, an age of machines and mass production. The age of steam and steel is coming, and it has a plan for the humble cacao bean that will change its very form and put it, finally, into the hands of everyone. The smoky, boisterous world of the London chocolate house begins to fade. The 18th century gives way to the 19th, and a new sound fills the air, the rhythmic hiss and clank of machinery. You are now in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, an era of explosive innovation and profound social change. The world is being reshaped by steam power, steel, and the relentless logic of the factory. And this revolution is about to come for chocolate. For thousands of years, from the Aztec meat to the European mortar and pestle, the process of making chocolate had been fundamentally artisanal. It was laborious, time-consuming, and expensive. The final product, whether a drink or a solid block for grating, was coarse and gritty by modern standards. The problem was fat. Cacao beans are about 50% cocoa butter, a natural fat. This high fat content makes the beans difficult to grind into a fine, dry powder, and it gives the resulting drink a heavy, sometimes greasy quality. If you wanted to make a smoother drink, you were stuck. If you wanted to make a solid bar of chocolate that wasn't greasy and soft, you were also stuck. You find yourself in a workshop in Amsterdam in the 1822. The man working here is Koen Rod Johannes van Houten. He is not a nobleman or a priest. He is a chemist and an inventor. a man of the new industrial age. He is obsessed with solving this fat problem. He believes there is a better way. In 1828, after years of tinkering, he unveils his invention. It's a machine that will change everything. The cocoa press. The device is deceptively simple in concept, but revolutionary in its effect. It's a powerful hydraulic press. Van Houten takes roasted and ground cacao beans, the thick, oily paste known as chocolate liquor, and puts it into the press. With immense mechanical pressure, the machine squeezes the paste. What happens next is the key. A golden, liquid fat, the pure cocoa butter, is slowly squeezed out and collected. Left behind in the press is a hard, dry cake of compressed cocoa solids. This is the mainstream, universally accepted story of the cocoa press. This single invention solved the fat problem and created two distinct, incredibly useful products from one. First, you have the cocoa butter. It's a stable, valuable fat with a subtle chocolate aroma. It would prove to be essential for making smooth, high-quality eating chocolate later on. Second, and more immediately important, you have the dry cocoa cake. Van Houten takes this cake and grinds it into a fine, silky powder. This is cocoa powder, as we know it today. Because most of the fat has been removed, this powder is much easier to mix with water or milk. It dissolves smoothly, without the easiness of the old chocolate paste. But Van Houten didn't stop there. He also developed a process, known as Dutching, where he treated the cocoa powder with alkaline salts. This neutralized its acidity, darkened its color, and gave it a milder, smoother flavor. This Dutch processed cocoa powder was a game changer. It made making a cup of hot chocolate incredibly easy. You no longer needed to grate a block of chocolate and whisk it laboriously. You could just spoon some powder into a cup, add hot water or milk and sugar, and stir. It was convenient. It was less rich, and it was cheap. Suddenly, a palatable chocolate drink was accessible not just to the middle classes, but to the working masses. But here's a quirky detail that often gets lost in the story of this great invention. Van Houten's press was just about creating a better drink. It was also, in a way, about health and morality. In the 19th century, there was a strong social movement, particularly among Quaker families in England like the Cadburys, Friss, and Roquefort, who were major players in the chocolate industry. They saw traditional, rich drinking chocolate as decadent and potentially corrupting. They saw Van Houten's invention as a way to create a more wholesome, nourishing, and temperate beverage for the working classes, an alternative to the evils of alcohol. They marketed their new cocoa powders not as an indulgence, but as a healthy, family-friendly food. Their advertising was full of images of rosy-cheeked children and robust workers, all powered by a good cup of cocoa. However, the historical nuance here is in the economic impact. The cocoa press was brilliant, but it also created a new kind of industrial logic. While it made a cheap cocoa powder, it also created a surplus of a very expensive byproduct, cocoa butter. Through ale, manufacturers weren't entirely sure what to do with all this extra fat. It was used in pharmaceuticals and cosmetics, but they had more than they could sell. There was an economic imperative to find a new use for this valuable ingredient. The solution to that problem would be the final, glorious step in chocolate's long evolution. Someone was about to figure out how to recombine that cocoa butter with cocoa solids and sugar to create something entirely new. The first modern chocolate bar. The industrial machinery is humming. Van Houten's press has separated the cacao bean into its two core components, a fine, defatted powder and a golden, fragrant butter. For a time, the world is content with this. Cocoa powder becomes a household staple, a convenient and affordable drink for the masses. But the surplus of that beautiful cocoa butter is piling up in warehouses, an economic puzzle waiting to be solved. The stage is set for the final act of innovation. You find yourself in Bristol, England, in the year 1847. You're in the factory of a Quaker calculator named Joseph Fry. The Fry family, like the Cadburys on Brontries, were deeply involved in the chocolate business and were driven by both profit and a sense of social mission. They had been making solid blocks of chocolate for grating for decades, but these were coarse, bitter, and not particularly pleasant to eat on their own. Fry and his team were experimenting, looking for a way to create a solid chocolate that was actually meant to be eaten as a confection. They have an idea, a simple, yet brilliant one. What if they took some of the cocoa powder, which was mostly solids in flavor, and mixed it with sugar, and then, this was the key, added back in some of that pure, refined cocoa butter. The cocoa butter would act as a perfect binding agent, a smooth, luscious fat that would give the bar a pleasant texture and a satisfying snap. In their workshop, they carefully measure out the ingredients: a portion of Dutch red cocoa powder for flavor, a larger portion of sugar for sweetness, and a generous amount of melted cocoa butter to bring it all together. They mix it into a thick, glossy paste and pour it into a mold. They let it cool and solidify. What emerges is something the world has never truly seen before. The first modern, mass-produced chocolate bar designed for eating. It was firm, it was smooth, or at least, smoother than anything before it, and it was sweet. Fry and Sons proudly launched their chocolate delicacy UX a manger. Delicious eating chocolate. This invention is the widely accepted birth of the modern chocolate bar. It was a revolutionary moment. Chocolate was no longer just a drink or a grating block. It was now a portable, affordable, and delicious treat. But it still wasn't quite the chocolate we know today. This first bar was a plain or dark chocolate. It was still somewhat gritty and coarse by our standards. The next major innovation would come from the neutral land of Switzerland. Your journey takes you to Vevey, Switzerland. In the 1872, a calculator named Daniel Peter is trying to solve a different problem. He wants to create a milk chocolate bar. The idea seems simple. Just add milk. But whenever he tried to add regular, liquid milk to his chocolate mixture, the water content would cause the chocolate to curdle and seize up. It was a disaster. His factory happened to be located next to the factory of a man named Henry Nestle, who had recently invented a process for making powdered milk for baby formula. Peter has a flash of insight. What if he used Nestle's powdered milk instead of liquid milk? He experiments with the formula, and in 1875, he succeeds. By blending cocoa butter, sugar, and powdered milk, he creates the world's first successful milk chocolate bar. The result is a sensation. It's sweeter, creamier, and milder than our chocolate, with a caramel-like flavor that is instantly appealing, especially to children. But there's one final, quirky piece to the puzzle of modern chocolate texture. You travel to another Swiss workshop, this one belonging to Rodolphe Flint in 1879. Flint was frustrated with how gritty and hard his chocolate was. He wanted to make it melt in the mouth. He invented a machine called a conky. It was a long, trough-like vessel with heavy rollers inside that continuously agitated the liquid chocolate mixture, back and forth, for hours, sometimes even for days. No one is entirely sure if he discovered the process by accident. One popular but likely apocryphal story says he left the machine running all night by mistake. Whether by accident or design, the result was miraculous. The conching process did two things. The constant friction generated heat, which drove off any remaining moisture and harsh tasting acids, and the continuous grinding action broke down the sugar and cocoa particles to a microscopic size, far smaller than the tongue can detect. The result was a chocolate that was incredibly smooth, glossy, and silky, with a luxurious, melt-in-your-mouth quality that was completely new. These three innovations, first eating bar, Peter's milk chocolate, and Lintus conky, are the holy trinity of modern chocolate making. They occurred in a span of just over 30 years, and together, they created the chocolate bars we know and love it today. The debate among food historians here is less about what happened, and more about the interdecadence and fierce competition of the era. These inventors were all aware of each other, constantly trying to one-up the competition. It was a chocolate arms race, a period of intense, rapid-fire innovation driven by a handful of brilliant and obsessive European entrepreneurs. The humble being from the Aztec jungle had been completely unutterably transformed. And so, the journey brings you here, not to a Swiss factory or an Aztec palace, but to a place far more familiar and, in its own way, just as overwhelming, the candy aisle of a modern supermarket. You stand under the bright, humming fluorescent lights, faced with a wall of color, twinkly wrappers in purple, gold, red, and blue all promise a moment of sweet, creamy comfort. You reach out and pick up a simple milk chocolate bar. It feels light and solid in your hand. You turn it over and read the ingredients. And in that simple list, you can see the ghosts of the entire journey. You see sugar, and you can almost hear the quiet satisfaction of a Spanish monk, adding the precious crystals to the bitter brew for the first time, taming its wild spirit. You see milk powder, and you can picture Daniel Peter in his Swiss workshop, his frustration turning to triumph as he finally creates a creamy, gentle chocolate that will conquer the world. You see cocoa butter and cocoa mass, and you can feel the immense, shuddering pressure of Van Houten's press, the machine that separated the bean into its soul and its spirit, powder and fat. You see the emulsifier, the soil lecithin, and you can almost hear the slow, rhythmic sloshing of Rodolphe Flint's conch, polishing the chocolate for days until it becomes impossibly, unnaturally smooth. Every ingredient is an echo of a revolution. In the 20th century, this revolution went into overdrive. Men like Milton Hershey in America didn't just make chocolate. They built entire towns around it. They perfected the art of mass production, turning a luxury item into an everyday snack, an affordable nickel bar for everyone. Chocolate became a scientifically formulated product, a staple of soldiers' rations into world wars, a strange and powerful echo of the Aztec warriors drinking it for strength before battle. The fundamental purpose, to provide energy and morale, had somehow survived across centuries and empires. Here's a final, quirky piece of the industrial puzzle. You glance down the aisle and see a bar of white chocolate. What even is that? It's the logical endpoint of Van Houten's invention. White chocolate is what happens when you take the other byproduct of the cocoa press, that surplus of cocoa butter, and mix it with sugar and milk, but with none of the actual cocoa solids. It contains no cocoa mass, which is why it has no dark color or classic bitter flavor. It's a confection born entirely from a clever use of industrial leftovers, a ghost of chocolate with the flavor of its fat, but not its heart. The journey from a sacred, bitter water to this sweet, ubiquitous bar seems complete, but there's one last conversation, one that is happening right now in boardrooms, on firms, and among academics. Look closer at the wrapper. You might see a small label, Fair Trade, sustainably sourced. This brings the story full circle. The cacao bean, which once powered the Aztec tribute system and later the brutal colonial plantation economy, is still at the center of complex ethical and economic questions. Historians and economists still debate the true impact of these labels and the legacy of chocolate's dark colonial past. How do we ensure that the farmers in those same jungle regions that once supplied Moctezuma are paid a fair price? Is it a fundamental solution, or just a small step in a very long journey of reconciliation? The questions are as complex as any theological debate that raged in 17th century Spain. You hold the bar in your hand. It is a miracle of food science, a triumph of global logistics, a nexus of history, technology, and culture. It is so far removed from the frothy, spicy, blood-red drink served in a gourd cup. And yet, the same magical being is the starting point for it all. The fruit of the gods, stolen by Quetzalcoatl, has completed a journey no one could have ever imagined. From a currency to a medicine, a sacrament to a sin, a warrior's fuel to a child's treat, the bitter has, for most of the world, become irrevocably sweet. Our journey is now complete. The long story of the cacao bean, from the shade of a sacred tree to the bright lights of a modern store, has been told. The voices of the past are beginning to fade. The rhythmic scrape of the meat is softening into a distant, gentle hum. The hiss of the Swiss conching machine dissolves into a quiet mist. The rustle of powdered wigs in the French court and the roar of debate in the London chocolate house are now just whispers, echoes carried on the cool night air. Let them all drift away. The proud Aztec warrior, the solitary emperor, the curious Spanish monk, the clever Swiss inventor, let their faces blur and fade into the soft darkness behind your eyes. Their story is now part of yours, a dream you have just walked through. The weight of history is lifting, replaced by the simple weight of your blanket. The complex flavors of chili and vanilla, of bitterness and sweetness, are melting away, leaving only the quiet, simple taste of stillness. There are no more facts to learn, no more dates to remember. The pages are turning softly in your mind, each one becoming blank as it passes. All that remains is the soft sound of your own breathing and the gentle, rhythmic beating of your own heart. The story is over. The night is yours. Let the darkness be a soft cloak, and let sleep be a quiet friend, waiting to welcome you.